Hi everyone, in this video of Accelerated Chess Dragon, we're going to be looking at a game played between Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, and Judit Polgar, one of the strongest women grandmasters. This was played in the 2014 World Blitz Championship in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. So without further ado, let's see this game. Carlsen has the white pieces and he opens with d4. Knight f6 by Polgar, c4, g6, knight c3, and this is a King's Indian defense. Bishop g7, e4, d6, and now f3, the same-ish variation of the King's Indian defense. Castles by Polgar, and now bishop to e3 by Carlsen. So Carlsen is just trying to develop his pieces on the king side, whereas Polgar, after she plays a6, signals that she wants to maybe play something like c6 and b5 and get some counterplay on the queen side. Knight ge2 by Carlsen, trying to mainly develop his knight to a good square like g3, as the knight can't really go to h3, as after bishop takes h3, Carlsen's pawn structure will be just wrecked. So c6 by Polgar. Now we can see that she's signaling that she wants to play b5 and get counterplay on the queen side. So now a4 by Carlsen, of course trying to restrict it. And now a5, as if Polgar doesn't really tolerate this a4 pawn, let's say she plays something like knight bd7, then after a5 we can see that Carlsen has gotten a lot of control of Polgar's space. I mean, if you could put this knight on some square like b6, and after this bishop is activated, say d5, and the lines are opened, the knight on b6 would be is quite a powerful piece. Therefore, Polgar doesn't want to let Carlsen have that scenario, therefore she plays a5, just stopping the pawn from coming to a5, and also clearing a square for her knight to come to, so that it can probably come to b4 next. Knight to g3 by Carlsen, developing his knight and getting ready to play bishop e2 and castle. Knight a6, bishop e2, and now queen c7 by Polgar. Developing her queen, and after Carlsen castles, she plays e5, trying to maybe disrupt this pawn trio in the center. And Carlsen just pushes forward, he plays d5, and now h5 by Polgar, maybe signaling that she wants to play something like h4 and push the knight back. And after queen d2, that is indeed what she does. She plays h4, and after knight h1, knight to h5. So Carlsen's knight is in the corner, but Polgar can also get her pieces into the game. And now after knight h5 is played, Carlsen, knowing that his knight should not stay in the corner of the board, plays knight f2. And now f5 by Polgar, threatening to play f4 and trap the bishop, and Carlsen gets his knight into d3 just at the right time. He plays knight d3, and now if f4 is played, which is what happened, Carlsen will just play bishop f2, and now he's attacking the h4 pawn. And here Polgar plays knight to g3, with the intention of, after h takes g3, she has a completely open file for her queen to enter through. We can imagine something like queen e7, queen h4, and then queen h2, checkmate, in some scenario like this. If Carlsen was trying to keep all of his material, then we can imagine something like this happening. Queen e7, and let's say that Carlsen does not acknowledge the threat. Queen h4 and queen h2 is practically unstoppable. So that's why Carlsen has to treat the threat immediately, and he rather just plays rook fd1. He doesn't care, because if he takes, then that is a problem, but he doesn't have to take. This knight g3 is not forcing Carlsen to take, therefore he doesn't take. He rather plays rook fd1, and now c5 by Polgar. Gaining more space, also trying to maybe put her knight on b4. H takes g3, and now Carlsen can actually win a pawn. And he can do this by playing bishop takes g3. Now, we know that if Carlsen were to play the bishop back to e1 and be a bit greedy, then that would end up bad for him, as he would basically lose the game, as his pieces cannot get active and let his king out before the queen starts coming to the attack. Therefore, after h6 g3, h6 g3, Carlsen just gave the piece back up. He knows that his greediness will not really be helpful, therefore he just gives the piece back up, and after f takes g3, he even wins a pawn after queen g5. Now we can see there's an attack on g6 and g3, so Polgar has to choose which pawn to sacrifice, and she chooses the g3 pawn. Queen f7, and now not queen takes g3 immediately, as Polgar cannot really defend the g3 pawn, so knight b5, just getting Carlsen's pieces a bit better. Squares. And now queen f6 by Polgar, queen takes g3, and now bishop h6, trying to maybe get into e3 and maybe d4. King f2, guarding that, and now knight b4. So Polgar has managed to get her pieces into Carlsen's weaknesses, and in this case the weakness was the b4 square. And now rook to h1 by Carlsen, trying to get a hold of this h-file, which will be very useful. King g7, and now queen h4, kind of forcing a trade of queens. You don't have to really trade the queens because there is g5, but after, say, something like queen h5, we can see that Carlsen's pieces are either going to be in a way better position than Polgar's, or maybe he'll just be able to convert his extra pawn and get an advantage. So therefore, we have an exchange of queens, and now bishop g5. First attacking the rook before Polgar does something. Rook h2, and now Polgar does not really have much she can do. There's this d6 pawn threatened. There's lots of pawns that could fall, potentially. So maybe this was out of desperation and the fact that she has so many problems coming into her position. This was all probably the reason why she played her next move, which was bishop to e3 check. And bishop e3 check is kind of a decoy, but it's losing a bit too much material. Here, Carlsen can freely just capture the bishop, and after knight c2 check, the main reason why bishop e3 check was played, so that you would decoy the king to e3, where now knight c2 can win the rook. Yes, you do win the rook, but the knight gets trapped. After king d2, knight takes a1, king c3, rook a6. If you play rook to h8, that really won't help, as after an exchange on h8. So king takes h8. The knight will take on d6. You will bring the knight back to b5, play b3, and then win the knight on a1. It's a pretty simple process. Therefore, rook a6 was played. It doesn't really change much if you play rook h8, so Polgar just defends the d6 pawn. And now rook to h1 by Carlsen, trying to eliminate the knight on a1. And after bishop d7, he does just that. Rook takes a1, and Polgar now exchanges more pieces. Bishop takes b5, c takes b5, and now rook a to a8. And I don't really like the idea of bishop takes b5, because when you're down material, exchange pieces, the quicker that it becomes an endgame, and the easier it is to take advantage of the weaknesses that you had in the middle game. Like in this example, where after bishop b5, cb5, the rook has to abandon the 6th rank, meaning that this d6 pawn can be a liable weakness. And after rook a8, b3 by Carlsen, he's just he's trying to maybe put his knight on b2 and then c4, trying to take advantage of this weak d6 pawn. Perhaps if the bishop didn't do this, then the knight would not be able to come to the c4 square, because then Carlsen would not take with c takes b5 and clear the square for his knight. But when she did this, now the c4 square is available and can take on that square. So rook h8, we can see that Polgar is trying to get at least some bit of counterplay with playing rook to h2. b6 by Carlsen, and now rook h2 nonetheless. I mean, Polgar needs the best counterplay that she can possibly get, and she plays rook h2 trying to take the g2 pawn. Carlsen does not allow it. He plays rook g1, and now rook a6 by Polgar. And this is a blunder, and Carlsen could probably have played another move to take advantage of this, but he played a very nice move that I would say takes advantage of what Polgar played and her inaccuracy that she made. So feel free to pause the video and try to solve what I think is a pretty nice way to end the game by Carlsen. And also you can try finding the other move that I'm trying to hint here. Okay, so the move that I think maybe it could have been played was actually knight takes e5. Getting a discovery attack on the rook, sacrificing the knight in the process, but that knight really doesn't matter. If you play rook takes b6, then after knight c4, this rook is kind of, it's not doing very well now, because the rook would have to go back to a6, and now we can see that that rook is very bad. It has to stay here defending against all these threats, and you can even play something like knight a3, and if the rook returns to b6, then something similar to what happened in the game, bishop to b5, and then the rook will be trapped, and then there's no way to defend knight c4. So, therefore, after rook a6, you could play knight takes e5. Knight takes c5 also does work, just to point it out. And the main reason why you cannot capture the knight in both scenarios is that after d takes c5, and keep in mind that the position would be the same whether I play knight takes e5 or knight takes c5, and if black were to capture the knight. Then there would be bishop takes a6, and after b takes a6, you just simply play king c4. And the c5 pawn is going to fall. This b6 pawn is a very dangerous pawn. If it's pushed, then that's basically it. So, therefore, knight takes c5 and knight takes e5 both work, but Carlsen found a nicer way to end this game. He played knight b2, simply trying to put the bishop on b5, and then put the knight on c4. And this would be the same thing that Carlsen planned, whether Polgar were to take the pawn on b6 or not take the pawn on b6. She did take the pawn on b6, and this is actually worse, because this allows Carlsen to play bishop b5. After this, she simply resigned the game, and Carlsen got a good victory. The simple reason why she resigned is that there's no way to stop knight c4, and after that, there are so many weaknesses that Carlsen can easily take advantage of, such as d6, a5, and even you could put the knight on b6. The king will just defend the kingside pawns. The rook and the knight will come and attack the queenside weaknesses, and then it's simply a hopeless position for Polgar. Therefore, after bishop b5 was played, Polgar simply resigned the game, and quite a victory for Carlsen. So, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comment section, and stay tuned for more chess.